The boy crisis resides where dads do not reside. So I then began to look into how do we get dads more involved? And I saw that many dads just felt that they weren't needed, they weren't wanted, that after there was a divorce, the mom had the right to the children and the dad had to fight for children. And that created a real double jeopardy. Over the age of 85, males are 1,750% more likely to commit suicide than females.
It seems that everything is done to basically kick the father out of a household.
If you're only interested in money, the price of boys committing crimes and being 93% of our prisoners, and almost all those prisoners are dad-deprived males, the price of that is more than $1 trillion of taxpayer money per year. The only people that could hear me were conservatives. Kamala Harris does not talk about the importance of fathers, the importance of men, the importance of what's happening with boys. The community that I thought I was aligned with was completely not understanding to this day the importance of fathers or men.
I'm seeing online the rise of people like Andrew Tate and people like that. It seems like our boys are just all going for this. But either way, it can't be right that we're in a society where role models for young boys and young men are people like Andrew Tate.
So it becomes very challenging for anyone to speak up about any ideology that they don't already believe, that they feel may counter the one that's there.
If you were to talk to the parents of this young boy, what advice would you give them in terms of how to best support their son? Welcome to the Magatte Wade Show. Today, we have an exceptional guest joining us, and his name is Dr. Warren Farrell. He is an internationally renowned author and expert on gender issues, relationships, and parenting. He has written several influential books, including The Boy Crisis and Rollmate to Soulmate. Dr. Farrell's work has sparked important conversations around the world, and today, we'll dive deep into his insights and explore how they relate to current trends and challenges. Dr. Farrell, thank you so much for being with us. It's a true honor to have you.
It's a pleasure to know you and to be with you on your show.
Likewise, thank you. So, Dr. Farrell, could you start by giving our listeners a brief overview of your background and also what inspired you to write The Boy Crisis as well as Rollmate to Soulmate? We'll obviously unpack the whole thing, but just give us an overall as to, all of this.
My interest in this area started in the 1960s and when the women's movement surfaced. And long story short, I was on the board of directors of the National Organization for Women in New York City, spoke all around the world on women's issues. And as I was speaking around the world, I began to see, I remember being in Japan and a Japanese teacher comes up to me and she says, and Dr. Farrell, we have, I'm so glad you're focusing on women's problems, but you may not know it, but in our classrooms here in Japan, the boys are actually having more problems than the girls. And this is in the late 60s, early 70s. And so I started hearing this also even from my sister, who is saying that, one of the boys in her class used to be doing really well, but now he's suddenly doing very badly. And when she sort of investigated, she found that his parents had gotten divorced recently. And so I began piecing all these pieces together. And then I found in the 70s that I was seeing that particularly children of divorce where the dads did not remain involved, either because the mother did not want them involved or because for other reasons, those children, what I call the dad-deprived children, were having particular challenges. And that was one of the characteristics that my sister had identified. And so I began to have that on my radar. And the more I got it on my radar, the more I started having an interest in it. And when I submitted a proposal to my publisher, I outlined 10 causes of the boy crisis, like fewer male teachers and so on. And as I studied each of those causes, I found that there was one cause that stood out as much more powerful than the other, and that was dad deprivation. I saw that to a large degree, not completely, but to a large degree, the boy crisis resides where dads do not reside. And so I then began to look into how do we get dads more involved? And I saw that many dads just felt that they weren't needed, they weren't wanted, that after there was a divorce, the mom had the right to the children and the dad had to fight for children. And that created a real double jeopardy because the fathers that could afford to fight for children oftentimes were very involved with their career, didn't have that much time for the children. The dads that really had lots of time for their children didn't have the money to fight for their children, and this was a lose lose lose. When I was the woman who I'm married to met 30 years ago, but before that I dated a number of women who had children, and the word that they used all the time was overwhelmed. And so the father involvement is really a woman's issue, as well as a man's issue, as well as a children's issue. And it's one of the reasons why the Florida legislature voted unanimously. All Republicans and all Democrats voted in the House of Representatives in Florida to contribute $70 million to develop programs that would let fathers know two things. One is why they are needed. Men respond when they are told they are needed. Every generation has its war, and every generation that has its war, we said, Uncle Sam needs you, some version of that. And men were willing to kill and be killed in order to in order to serve, in order to protect. And I think it's a lot easier to get men to love and be loved than kill and be killed. And but in order for them to do that, they have to know why they are necessary. And no one knows the answer to that question. Moms don't, and dads don't. So we can't blame moms because moms can't hear what dads don't say. And one of the reasons I wrote the Boy Crisis book was because I saw that there was no literature out there explaining things like why roughhousing leads to children being more empathetic. Can you believe empathy being related to roughhousing?
Yeah.
And so it was so counterintuitive. So I
Wow.
found that it was really important to help mothers and fathers understand the multiple things that dads and moms tend to do differently and how children can benefit from the checks and balance parenting that combine the best of both parents parenting.
That's interesting. This is interesting. And then moving on to, as we're looking at the boy crisis, what do you see, what role, if any, the current educational system we have is playing? Do you think how are you seeing the current educational system at various, levels of grades? And do you think it's playing a role into this? Is it, what's going on there? Is there something going on there?
It's definitely playing a role. So, for example, and here's the way that role can be seen in proportion. When a boy grows up with an involved dad, and then he goes to a school that is mostly all female and has a relatively small amount of playtime, recess, and doesn't have much vocational education, there's a price that's paid, but it's not a huge price. When a boy grows up in an all-female female home that is a mother taking care of him, and he goes from a female-dominated home to a female-dominated school, he has no role model, and he doesn't have that sort of boundary enforcement that fathers tend to require of their sons and their daughters, and particularly of their sons. And so he becomes much more vulnerable to a gang saying, hey, you have a family, it's us, and just prove that by hurting this person or killing this person or dealing drugs in this way. And then as he gets a few years older, he starts to be much more, he sees that he's not being as productive in school. He's being a failure to launch. People have no respect for him. He's not being able to get a job that earns good money. Therefore, he doesn't have a car. He can't take girls out. Girls don't respect him. And so there's a tendency for him to feel down on himself. And that tends to make him very vulnerable to drug dealers who say, hey, listen, we can get you 5 times, 10 times as much money as you're doing flipping hamburgers in McDonald's. Come over to us. And then he gets into drugs, into crime, and so on. And so those are some of the patterns that happen when our schools do a deprivation of male teachers. They do a deprivation of recess because boys really thrive on physical activity. Physical activity each day needs to precede mental activity. Boys aren't bad once they've had the ability to work out their stuff
Yeah, get
and
it out. Yeah.
be physical and play dodgeball and play tag and play soccer, etc. And so it's also true that when boys, I grew up and I was good at academics, but a lot of boys aren't. And when a boy is not good at academics, and there's no vocational education, that really leaves him no place to go. And whereas a boy who can be trained in plumbing or electrician and a number of other activities is now in these days entering into a market where there's oftentimes a too small amount of people being trained in that way. And so a boy can look at the fact that, okay, I don't like physics and I don't like chemistry, but physics and chemistry applied to welding will give me 5 times as much money as a welder than if I don't know physics and chemistry. Now he has a goal, and the goal is going to be a welder, and he's going to make decent money. And so suddenly, physics and chemistry, as it applies to welding, then he'll focus on that. That's the way boys tend to work. But when there's no or minimal vocational education, he has a purpose void. And a boy with a purpose void and high testosterone is a danger to himself and to others.
And to others. I could not agree more. So on that front, Dr. Farrell, what do you think needs to, how would you advise parents? I mean, have you given up on the education system, or are you seeing some education systems that seem to be doing a better job at what you just described? This whole concept of male focus, making sure we have enough male teachers, making sure that we allow boys for more recess time, especially getting it out of a system, digging
Mm-hmm.
holes and all of that good stuff. And are you seeing some type of educations doing a better job at this? And or what else do you recommend to parents to keep an eye on, especially those parents who are not, for various reasons, able to offer a home with a father role figure in it for their boys?
Absolutely. First of all, I think one of the best work that is being done in the education system is being done by Michael Gurian and the Gurian Institute, who are helping a lot of teachers understand that boys and girls learn differently, and therefore teaching differently to boys and girls, or accounting for the way that boys tend to learn, such as the recess ahead of time, such as the doing. Boys, when I taught for a while, I instinctively taught by teaching boys and girls in the class to do things, to do projects, to act out things together and do role playing. And my supervising teacher, when I was student teaching, said, "This is really interesting. These 4 kids have been really losers in the classroom, but they are really doing well." Now, I had no idea at this time, that doing things led to that really appealed to boys, and yet they were able, when they had projects like that to do, to really brighten up and lighten up. And so that's one thing. Second, we really need to understand how crucial this is, and that means understanding the more than 70 different metrics in which boys are falling behind girls, and why in almost all those metrics, dad deprivation either predicts that failure or increases that failure. So, for example, the single biggest predictor of suicide is lack of father involvement or dad deprivation. And suicide, and so we're often saying, well, we need to put our resources into our daughters. And there's no need to deprive our daughters of resources in order to also make sure that our sons have fathers involved, that we tell fathers how needed they are, that we relieve single mothers from the burden of feeling overwhelmed. These are all win-win situations, fortunately. And so getting fathers involved and helping and understanding the evidence that the boys, for example, and girls, when they're 9 years of age, they rarely commit suicide, and they commit suicide about equally. But between the ages of 10 and 14, boys commit suicide at twice the rate of girls.
Wow.
Between the ages of 15 and 19, at 4 times the rate of girls. And between the ages of 20 and 24, at 5 times the rate of girls.
Wow.
If that figure was reversed, I would be fighting for us to understand why girls are doing suicide. Now, it happens to be that, over the age of 85, males are 1,750% more likely to commit suicide than females. And we would certainly know that figure if that figure was reversed. And I'd want us to know that figure. And so we have to understand that there's, why is it that boys are far more likely to be addicted to video games? Why is it that they're far more likely to be addicted to drugs and to die from drug overdoses? These are all signs of jeopardy and hazards and things that we need to clarify. If you're only interested in money, the price of boys committing crimes and being 93% of our prisoners, and almost all those prisoners are dad-deprived males. The price of that dad deprivation and that percentage of committing crimes, combined with everything else in the 70 metrics that I talk about in the boy crisis, the price of that is more than $1 trillion of taxpayer money per year, to say nothing of the heartbreak of families that have their sons commit suicide, or that are hoping for their sons and daughters to both be going to decent schools and having a decent education and at least having a decent life, and then seeing them wasted out on drugs or be homeless. And so these are the reasons that, as you've heard me say, that when only one sex wins, both sexes lose.
Loose. That's right. That's right. That's right. And then, isn't it true, Dr. Farrell? Also, you were telling me this when we were in London a couple of weeks ago. Didn't you tell me about that the not having a father in the home also reduces the lifespan? Forget even if you're not committing suicide, you're not doing any of these bad things, you still, it looks like, will have a lower life expectation as a man because you didn't have a father in the household. Can you tell me? Can you tell us, the audience, about this?
One of the most amazing things that I came across in the research for the boy crisis was the length of telomeres. So they did a study at where the telomere length, telomeres are are inside of your cells, and they have many markers that predict a longer or shorter life expectancy. And so, and they found that those markers were particularly accurate at the age of 9.5, that longer telomeres predicted a longer life expectancy and vice versa. And so one of the studies happened to break down, and they were able to measure that children that had father involvement at the age of 9.5 had on average 14% longer telomeres. But boys whose dads were not involved, their telomeres were 40% shorter even
40.
than the girls, and vice versa, 40% longer for those that had father involvement. And so you can get a sense just of the impact of dad deprivation at such an early age. And then many people say, well, dads aren't, we have a motherhood instinct and not a fatherhood instinct. And I would not have argued that before I did the research for the boy crisis. But then I started seeing research showing that there is such a thing that can best be called a dad brain. That is, there's a nest of neurons in your brain that just is sort of parallel to but below the nest of neurons that creates the motherhood instinct, that when a father expresses involvement with his child, is like touching the womb of the mother, is there for the birth of the child, is there when the child is extremely young, and that dad's involvement with that child and the prospect of being a good dad, that makes all those neurons fire, and what I call a dad brain develops that is parallel to the motherhood instinct. And so, but on the other hand, if the dad perceives his role when the child is born as having to be involved in what I call the father's catch-22, that is, he learns to love his children by being away from the love of his children, taking a job as, let's say, a national salesman when before he was a local salesman, because a national salesman earns a lot more. If he if his response to having a child is to put all his focus on earning money so that children can move into a better home and a better neighborhood and have better schools, which is a very frequent response, then there is some development of that those neurons and the dad brain, but not nearly as much as there is when there is active involvement of the father. And so these were things that I just, as I did the research for the boy crisis, it was just like one thing after the other um, came to me. But the most important single thing that I learned was the differences between dad style parenting and mom style parenting, and the impact that those differences have on child development.
It is so, so sad when I hear you, Dr. Farrell, because so many of those fathers who are there and trying to be good fathers, it is true that for them, the first call of duty is to provide for the family.
Yes.
And they think that maybe, just taking this job, and in their mind, they're sacrificing, and they're doing the highest call of order for the child.
Mm.
And it is so sad to hear that, even me, I would have thought, before, reading your books and talking to you, that it was a good thing.
Mm.
I used to take those men into, like high consideration. Here they are sacrificing
Mm.
themselves to give a better life to their families. Give us more access to more, if we want to go ballet, or if we want to do this. I mean, dads are working really hard with moms
Mm.
to give us all of that, but to know that this is what it costs in the end. When you put it all together, cost benefit, it's that the child is, I feel like if any father knew this, that they would probably think about it twice. Is that something that you notice too, that very few parents know that? Because if that's the case, then there is hope. Because when
Yes.
people don't know, they don't know. But is that what you found? It looks like
Exactly.
we don't know.
In fact, the criteria I use in order to write a book is that I feel the area is very important, but that some important and crucial things about this area are not known. And early on, I began during those years that I was telling you were early years in my career. I started seeing that what was happening with boys was not known, and why it was happening, and the importance of father involvement. I had no idea that father involvement was so important. And the Harvard longitudinal study, which is the longest longitudinal study that's ever been done, and it's a study on happiness. And
Mhm.
it finds that children, families like of four, that have somewhere between $60,000 and $80,000 a year, depending on where in the country that they live, they are, once they have that type of money for
Yeah,
economic security,
yeah,
that almost all the rest of the
yeah,
way that happiness happens in a family is
yeah,
by dad and mom being involved with the children and doing things with children. And so then the big issue became for me, like, moms would complain like about, the dad is always sort of like roughhousing with the kids, and the kids seem excited, but boy, it's like I have only one more child to monitor here, and she's sort of feeling like, well, I don't want to interfere, I don't want to be controlling, but on the other hand, I don't want the children to get hurt, and I'm worried that the children will get hurt. Well, she's only about 99% likely to be right. Sooner or later, roughhousing kids, somebody's going to get hurt. But what nobody understood was that when the child gets hurt, when let's say the brothers and sisters, one of the siblings gets hurt, usually the dad style parenting will be, okay, Jimmy, you can't stick your elbow in your sister's eye like that. And if you do that again, no more roughhousing. So the kids are in a way treated a little bit like a puppy. The treat is the roughhousing, and if the puppy doesn't do the right thing, there's no treat. And so the kids go, okay, dad, but they're testing the dad out. So the next time they still get caught up in the excitement of everything, and they do the same thing again, and they're being aggressive and not assertive. And this time, but most dads will say, um, the second time around, okay, no more roughhousing. And the kids will go, oh, sorry, dad, I won't do it again. And the dad will usually say, sorry, you had your chance.
hmm
So, and mom is looking on and going, my God, doesn't he get it? The kids hurt each other twice. Why are they doing the roughhousing at all? And
hmm
here's the reason. The next time the children do roughhousing and dad says, if you are too aggressive, and here's what aggressive is, and here's what versus what assertive is, then the roughhousing is going to stop. Well, now the kids know that the roughhousing is in fact going to stop. Dad proved it last time. So now the kids have to deal with a number of things. They're getting boundary enforcement, not
Mm.
boundary setting. Almost
Mm.
no parent understands the difference between setting boundaries and enforcing boundaries, and it's all the difference in the world. Moms will often feel very upset that they spend a lot of time with the children and they tell the children the same thing dad tells the children, you can't be
Yes.
too aggressive. And the children go, yeah, yeah, mom, thank you. And they go right ahead and be too
I was
aggressive. And the mom feels like, what
but
is
also
this? Total lack of respect here. And in fact, that's exactly what it is. It's a lack of respect because the mom set the boundaries again, and the kids knew that they could manipulate their way out of those boundaries again. Whereas the dad just said, "Sorry, you had one warning. It's over. Maybe if you're good and you do your homework, et cetera, we'll do roughhousing again later, sometime in the week, later in the week, but not now." And so the children are learning postponed gratification. They
Mm.
both want to push their brother and sister aside.
Mm.
But they're learning that with their dad, they don't have that option if they want that treat. So
Mm.
they postpone what they want immediately, get the sister out of there, brother out of there, and for what they really want, the big treat, the roughhousing. And postponed gratification is the single biggest predictor of success or failure in life. And so there's so many things that I talk about in the Boy Crisis book that children learn from this experience, including empathy. Now, if a dad
Mhm.
said, I want to roughhouse with the kids, they'll help them increase empathy. Mom and would go like, you must
Yeah.
be kidding.
Yeah,
Like that's
right?
the most
You're like,
counterintuitive
yeah.
to
When
it.
you
And
first
maybe
said that, I was like, "Huh, what is he talking about?" But I'm like, maybe.
empathy. But what's happened there, and what I just described, was the children are now being required to think
Yeah,
of their brothers and sisters' needs, not just their own needs.
that's right.
Empathy does not develop naturally. What develops naturally is self-centeredness. Empathy is the child has to learn that it's going to lose something if it doesn't think of someone besides himself or herself.
The Magatte Wade Show is brought to you by Skin is Skin. Skin is Skin is a premium assortment of skin and lip therapy products manufactured with natural ingredients originated in Africa. I founded Skin is Skin in an effort to create jobs, prosperity, and provide a greater sense of dignity for my beloved Senegal. Skin is Skin is an African product made in Africa by Africans, bringing money and capital into African economies through value creation. Purchasing African products made in Africa by Africans is what Africa needs to thrive. Visit skinnyskin.com and discover our products. It's fascinating. So now that we know all of this, Dr. Farrell, what type of pushbacks, if any, have you encountered? Are people being supportive? And also, I am thinking, especially when I hear this, I'm thinking about, some people. Let's face it. Today, it is considered to be conservative and, in a way, a bad thing to believe in the role of fathers in their children's lives. Um, we people like you, me, we understand that importance, the importance of men, of fathers. But it does look like the minute you go for that understanding, you're being labeled a right wing. And on top of that, you have what I call the modern day feminist, that wave 3.0 feminist who are borderline, on a mission to commit a genocide on men, for various reasons. What are you seeing there? How are you finding yourself being able to get the ear of that other side, or are they completely at war with you on this?
Well, the good news is the type of thing that happened in Florida, where the Speaker of the House read the Boy Crisis book, used it with his children, found it effective, gave it to the heads of family committees in both the Republican and Democratic Party. They drew up legislation, and $70 million was contributed to get dads more involved. That's on the
Congratulations.
positive side of the coin. On
Congratulations.
the negative side of the coin, started back in when I was on the board of directors of the National Organization for Women in New York City, and it was the early 70s, and I was noticing there was a big increase in divorce. And we had some of the first literature that was coming out showing that children that didn't have father involvement were doing much worse than the ones that did. And so I brought this up to the board members at the National Organization for Women in New York City, and there was like silence. And
Wow.
someone said to me, Warren, don't you realize that our feminist members, that if there's a divorce, they want to have the choice of whether they're with their fathers, the children are with them full time, or if they meet another man that's a lot better for them, and they want to move out of state, they should be able to do that and start a new life and not be saddled with a life where they feel that they've made a mistake. And I said, don't you also care about how well the children do? And they said, we're in favor of women's rights. And I said, well, a woman, I always will support a woman having the right to have children. But once you accept that right, you also what comes with it is a responsibility. And you have a right to choose to have the children and also take the responsibility for doing what is best for them. And it looks like what we're finding out is that it's best for them to have the biological father and mother. And honestly, I don't really know why. I just know that that's what the initial data shows.
Mm.
And so again, I felt this room full of silence.
Oh.
And then one of the women said, well, you yourself acknowledge, Warren, that that this is the beginning of the research. Maybe 20, 30 years from now, these kids will do just equally as well with or without the father. And so why don't you go ahead and do more research, Warren, and see what you come up with. But I was very clear what the message was. And the message was basically, right now, you are the leading male feminist in the world. You get 50 speaking engagements a year. That is making you do very, very well financially. And that those speaking engagement referrals are going to end if you start finding that children need their fathers as much as their mothers. And so
Wow.
I did more research, and I did see that the children, more and more, the research showed what I, hoped and feared it would show, because hope and fear for the two obvious reasons. And so I started to deal with myself, knowing that my career was going to basically fall apart if I started to articulate these things. But on the other hand, I at least had the internal feeling of I was doing something positive that wouldn't otherwise be done. And so I did begin to continue writing and speaking about the importance of fathers involved. And the only people that could hear me were conservatives, just like you said. And it was like, and suddenly here I am, one of the leading liberals in the world. And
Wow.
suddenly I'm seeing that, the community that I thought I was aligned with was completely not understanding to this day the importance of fathers or men. Kamala Harris does not talk about the importance of fathers, the importance of men, the importance of what's happening with boys. The liberals are largely treating it as, we have a limited number of resources, and if we pay attention to boys and men's issues, we're going to take away from women's issues. Well, when I wrote the Boy Crisis book, that changed a little bit, but it was still among the strong feminists. The argument was, Warren, boys are just young men who have male privilege and male power and will be part of the patriarchy and will be oppressors who will be oppressing women. So why are you in favor of boys' issues? Isn't this just going to take resources away from women and girls? And therefore, maybe you are a misogynist or a men's rights person, which is the equivalent of a
Wow.
misogynist from that perspective. And so it's hard. The amount of economic cost to me was well over $20 million. But it was, but I'm doing well enough financially. And so I'm happy, and that's thank goodness to, in part to my wife, and in part to finding ways of sustaining myself as an author. But it's certainly been a challenge.
Hmm. I'm so sorry to hear that, Dr. Farrell. And likewise, boys in general. But for me, as you know, my focus has been very much on Black wellness. You know, building prosperity. How Black people, especially in Africa, but really, it's the whole race that we have to work on these issues. And same thing, if you want to build prosperity, like you were saying, postponing gratifications is one of the easiest signs of how well you'll do in the future or not. And to see that this is linked a lot to the presence of a father in the home or not, then you can see why someone like me, I've got some huge issues with the welfare system the way we know it in this
Yeah.
country, because I think it seems that everything is done to basically kick the father out of the household.
Yeah.
And literally, it seems women are being paid so that there is no male figure in the household. And then I'm turning around thinking, okay, you're at the same time, these are the same people who claim to care about so-called racism, and then the first ones to complain about systemic racism. But when they want to talk about systemic racism in this nation, I'm like, perhaps in addition to the criminal justice situation, there's the real systemic issue here probably is in what you call the welfare.
Mhm.
That thing has to be really revisited, and we need to really think about what are its consequences, intended or not. And at first I thought it was good intention gone bad, as many oftentimes it goes. But now, with everything that we know, the fact that these same people are still pushing back on the importance of men and fathers in the life of their boys, in this case black boys, then I'm starting to wonder, is it just good intentions gone bad, or maybe there is bad intentions here? I know it sounds creepy and borderline conspiracy theory to speak of, but my point is, once you know better, why do you continue and especially also fight it? So it's particularly puzzling for me, this whole issue when it comes to black men, young black men. We all know they're doing the worst in schools, and it's just all over the place. But yet, where are the fathers? And then they'll say, oh, it's because of a criminal system. But beyond that, also the welfare system is also doing a big part in all of this. So
Yeah.
I don't know if it's something that you talk about or you have seen things there too. But for me, that's when you speak, I'm also being reminded of that. And I find it funny that it's always the same people, because I also come from the liberal side, and I've always thought, and I prided myself in being a liberal because I really believed we were those who actually care. I always prided myself in caring, but then it's become bizarre that I feel that we say we care, we say I care about boys, we say we care about racial equality, we say all of these things, but the minute the data shows something that doesn't fit our cultural ideology, whatever you want to call it, all of a sudden, boom, the curtain comes down. So
Yeah.
I am starting to wonder what really motivates certain people. Is it
Yes. Yeah.
right? It's
I think
bizarre.
with feminism, it was the competition of caring with an ideology. And the ideology was that men have the power, men have the privilege, and we're part of the patriarchy. And so every feminist, every gender studies or women's studies department in every university sort of taught that women, the evidence was clear, quote unquote, that they're all the presidential candidates, they're all the presidents, they're all the top CEOs, most of them, and so on. And for the average feminist focused on that became the ideology that could not be disputed. And if you look at just that ideology, there's no argument that there's been no female presidents and that there's been no, there's a small percentage of people in the top CEO positions are women. And so, but that sort of moved into, if once an ideology you're part of, if you begin to question any part of it, you begin to not get the support of other people who hold that ideology. And you begin to see, well, maybe you don't belong in the women's studies department here. Maybe you're not one of us. And so it becomes very challenging for anyone to speak up about any ideology that that they don't already believe, that they feel may counter the one that's there. So looking at the challenges that boys are having and treating boys' suicide and saying, gee, there are 70 different metrics in which boys are doing worse than girls, and most of them relate to dad deprivation. Let me investigate this as part of the women's studies department. And suddenly you're seen as are you really somebody who belongs in the women's studies department, or are you our enemy? And so this type of mentality exists on both sides of the political spectrum. Once an ideology is developed, and you're part of you're part of an oil company at an international oil convention, and you say maybe there are some problems that oil producing is creating. Suddenly, people are looking at you like, do you really belong here? And if you seek a top level position there because you think you feel you have something to contribute, it's like, no, try a low level position or get out of here. And so this is, and now this relates to a much bigger issue, which is the issue of that you and I talked about before, of that I talk about in Role-Mate to Soulmate, which is the communication and how we communicate or how we don't communicate. Um, I found that the Achilles heel of human beings is our inability to handle personal criticism without becoming defensive. And so, but yet what we all want from each other, I saw that couple after couple, usually if I talked to them privately, they had a concern about their partner. And when asked if they brought that up, the answer would usually be one of two things. I can't bring that up because it just will create a fight, or I have brought that up 100 times and it never goes anywhere. I don't feel at all understood. And so I started to see that that oftentimes led to divorces. And divorces often led to the mom has the right to the children and dads have to fight for children. And that led to the boy crisis. And so I started to sort of look at, the work I had been doing for 30 years on couples communication. I started seeing that as being something that was more important than I recognized at the outset, which was that if I can teach couples how to be able to hear personal criticism without becoming defensive, I can really do something that will help keep marriages together and therefore preserve the family and therefore preserve the ability of the children to have both parents and not have a divorce. And as we
Good.
both know, anyone that sees bad communication and then sees a divorce, when they get married, they're far more likely to divorce themselves. And so I saw this as a multi-generational thing. And so,
Interesting.
so I started working on that issue. Okay, go ahead.
Mhm. Interesting. No, that's very true. And Dr. Farrell, it's interesting that for when I started seeing where feminism was going in terms of just systematically, almost oftentimes, when they started, where after a while, I looked there and I thought to myself, if we're not careful, we're going to end up at some point doing for little boys what is it that we had to do for little girls. And it seems like we're right there.
Mhm.
We're right there. We managed to get ourselves into this really bad position, but I hope we wake up. And I really want to thank you for continuing the fight on behalf of boys, but really more than boys, it's on behalf of boys and girls, because like you said, if one gender loses, both gender lose. It's just the nature of it. It's how it works.
Absolutely.
So now moving on to the book, from Role-Mates to Soulmates. On this one, you explore the evolution of relationships and how we go from role-mate to soulmate and why it's important. Can you walk us through actually why that is important? Why is it important to do that transition from role-mate to soulmate?
But when our probably your parents, my parents, and grandparents, when I ask in a workshop, who communicates better, you and your partner, or your grandparents, and almost 100% say they and their partner do. And then I say, well, what's the divorce rate for your generation versus grandparents' generation? And it's higher for our generation.
Yep,
And
always.
the logic of that would be that the better your communication is, the more your divorce rate is, and it's obviously not the case.
Yeah.
So what else is happening here? What's happening is an increase in expectations.
Mm,
When all around the world, when you're focused on survival,
mm,
till death do us part is a survival issue.
mm,
But as you start to be able to be in a developed nation that has the ability to be able to support your own family in a reasonable amount of way, the more you are able to support each other, the more you start asking questions that are self-oriented, and you want from your partner also to be completely understood and heard and listened to. However, there is no history of knowing how to do that. That is biologically and historically speaking, if you heard a criticism, you were hearing an enemy. So it was functional to get up your defenses or to kill the enemy before the enemy killed you, the best defense.
Yeah.
And so that was functional for survival. It's just dysfunctional for love. And so I began to ask the question, is there a way around that? And I mentioned before when I was talking about the Boy Crisis book that I'm inspired to write a book or to research something when I think I might have a chance of having a solution that no one else has developed. And so I started experimenting with the possibility of how do I get somebody to not be defensive? At the beginning, I was focusing on that in the workshop about the importance of not being defensive. But I found that the moment the couple went home and a criticism appeared, that wisdom disappeared. So I said, okay, this has got to be something that is practiced, not just lectured, that you don't just agree to intellectually. So I started to be, ultimately, I got people to develop 2 hour period per week, called a caring and sharing time, in which each partner had a chance to share one concern. But before they shared that concern, I asked them, the person who was listening to the concern that they would consider a criticism, to first meditate into an altered state from their naturally biological defensive state. So, for example, I would that one state would be a mindset in which they said, "love guarantee," and that love guarantee mindset, they might say to themselves, the more I provide a safe environment for my partner's feelings and thoughts and fears, even if I consider them exaggerated or a lie, the more I provide a safe environment for that more my partner will feel heard by me, seen by me, and therefore loved by me, and therefore the more they will love me. Another mindset I have everybody in my workshops, and I instruct people in the book to do the same thing, to make out to sit opposite each other, back to back, and to write out the answer to this question on a piece of paper. Imagine your loved one is likely to be killed, 100% likely, and you are, but you realize you can save their life, 100% for sure, but you'll take a 50% chance of losing your own life.
Yeah.
Will you do it or not do it? And the answer is you have 3 choices: yes, no, uncertain. And the only caveat is that children, make believe you don't have children. And so when I asked that question, about 90 some odd percent of the males say yes, they would take a 50% chance of losing their own life if they could have a 100% guarantee of saving their partner's life. I asked the women that question, 80% or so of the women say the same thing. So then the first mindset that they do before they hear their partner's criticism is to say, well, if I will die for my partner, maybe I can listen to my partner. And so having people move into a set of mindsets that is helping them temporarily escape the biological inheritance of being defensive when they're criticized. And they're beginning to associate their partner's criticism with an opportunity to get more love from their partner and be more in love with their partner. And so this is only 2 of the 6 mindsets and just a little portion of what we do. And to give one more example of that, before they go into these mindsets, I work with them on how to appreciate their partner. Now, how to appreciate a partner is not just, I love you, I think you're the most beautiful person that ever existed, things like that. Those are things that your wife or your husband has some version of that they've heard before. So I work on the specifics of appreciation. So to take it on so suppose you say to somebody, my wife, she's a great cook. And your wife feels good that you've acknowledged her, let's say in front of company, that she's a good cook. But if you say, look at the way she makes that turkey's skin so crisp. I don't know how she does it. Now she's beginning to feel seen at a deeper level. And then you say, and notice how the dressing is so moist. It just, how does she make the turkey, the skin so crisp, yet keep the turkey so moist? And
Mm-hmm.
just notice the spices in that. Is that parsley? Is that sage, rosemary, thyme, or some other, you know, Simon and Garfunkel spice? And and so what I'm teaching them to do is to give appreciations at 7 levels of specificity.
I
And I
see.
train them during the workshop to find out what they can appreciate in their partner, to do something I call panning for gold.
Mm.
And so rather than that, I say that people who are relationship rich pan for gold, just like people who were the gold miners didn't focus on the stones, they focused on finding the gold. So
That's right.
walk over your partner's stones, find their gold, let them know you appreciate them. So before they move into this altered state where they're hearing their partner's criticism, they share 2 very specific appreciations of their partner, and when both partners are done hearing each other, they end by sharing 2 appreciations. It's what I call a caring and sharing sandwich. And so
Mm.
those are things that were so helpful to people in the workshop, that I wanted to put it into book form and also to in an online video form. And what I'm going to do with the online video is to build a foundation to distribute that online video to all the impoverished communities in the country.
Hmm. Talking of which, that's wonderful. And talking of which, do you feel like impoverished couples are having a harder time with this communications problem, or is it reverse, or is it the same? Like, are you seeing something specific there as well, or is it, or all the socioeconomics equally um, affected?
Everybody, straight, gay, there's almost no difference in couples and poor or wealthy. Almost everybody feels that they don't feel heard by their partner. They don't feel really seen by their partner, and that they're walking on eggshells to bring things up. And that when they do bring things up, their partner responds defensively, and then they respond defensively to that, and it escalates. And
Mm,
so no one has the skill set to both do
mm,
the type of thing that I'm talking about, but then also that I talked about that being only 2 hours a week. The other 166 hours is what I call a conflict-free zone. And so I teach people what to do when a criticism comes up during the week. So I make it clear that a conflict-free zone does not mean a criticism-free zone,
yeah.
that you'll feel criticized by your partner, even if your partner doesn't feel it was a criticism, that just a suggestion for an improvement that would enhance intimacy, you may experience it as a criticism. And then your natural tendency biologically will be to respond to that criticism so you don't lose the love of your partner. The more you love your partner, the more you fear losing their love. And
Mm,
so the more likely you are to be defensive. So love does
mm,
not prevent defensiveness. And and so, what to do about that? And so, but once a couple has been through the experience of this caring and sharing time and feeling really heard and seen by their partner, they have an ability then to visualize that I can either respond to my partner's criticism right here, and the chances are about 90% that it will escalate and only become worse, or I can take that response I want to give and I can save that for the caring and sharing time, and then there's about 100% chance that I'll be completely heard. So that's the incentive to save it to the caring and sharing time. Then I teach a couple that if they do get into an escalation, how they can use something that I call alone power to end that escalation. The person being criticized can say something like, let me save my response to caring and sharing. I know you'll hear me a lot better then. And so any one person can use that alone power to get out of an argument. Therefore, any argument that escalates is both people's fault. And so,
interesting.
and then that maintaining the conflict-free zone involves a number of steps, and all this involves a number of steps. It takes me 3.5 days to teach this workshop, whether it's online or whether it's in person. But the end, and it doesn't work. This workshop doesn't work. The book will not work if it's only read. One has to practice it, because it's like going to a wonderful physical exercise class and learning all these great exercises. It's good for that day in the gym, but if you don't practice it, it's worthless.
That's true. That's true. It works like that. And Dr. Farrell, have you noted from your work, uh, is could it be true that maybe generations prior to us were just better communicators, or do you think that for different reasons they had to stay in marriages and we conflated that with being better communicators, or what do you think? Do you think there's something in our modern world and modern ways that is making us bad, worse communicators in relationships?
Sort of yes and no, but mostly people historically had to, especially in poor areas, had to survive, and they knew that a divorce would be a very significant problem. So women and men both kept their feelings to themselves, but the problem with that is that they usually stuffed their feelings, and they often ended up drinking or doing. Women at least had the outlet of being able to talk with other women who would empathize with what they felt. But men felt that if they talked with other men, you're at work, let's say you're a banker, and talk to your banker colleague, and you say, and you're a male, and you say, you know, I'm really having problems with my wife at home, and we really having these challenges. Well, you're given about 30 seconds to a minute to be able to say that. But if you don't change the topic after 30 seconds to a minute, and then the discussion comes as to whether or not somebody should be promoted into a position, and it gets around to you as a possible person to be promoted, you're far more likely to feel that you've just lost respect for this person. You see that they're having problems, so maybe don't promote them. Then if they're not promoted, they can't take care of their family as well. They're ashamed when they go home. They feel worse about themselves. And so for different reasons, both women and men learned to stuff their feelings. But they also learned to not have expectations that were higher than this. Yeah, we got married. We have to stick with it till the end. Here and there, we have a big blow up, but we go the other way, and maybe there was some domestic violence. He hit me, I hit him, but we don't have an alternative here. People often talk about having unconditional love, but love has not become unconditional as it's become better. It's become more conditional. If you were to go to your women friends and say, he beat me up again, they would say, Magatte, you don't need to. You're worth more than that. You don't need to be around somebody who beats you up and that type of thing, or somebody who ignores you, or somebody who doesn't pay attention to your needs, desires, or wants. That's more conditional than it used to be generations ago. And so as love has become more conditional, the conditions are more likely to be violated by somebody or both of you. And then you feel like, I should get out of this relationship rather than stay in the relationship.
Interesting, interesting. And then, so in all of this, and perhaps this is, I don't know how to ask this. Because there's a phenomenon we all are aware of that's going on, especially among young couples. It does look like, and I don't know, maybe it goes back to what you were talking about, the sperm count and all of that, but it does look like when it comes to intimacy, there's issues there too, right? And do you think everything is related? Do you think it's all related? I mean, what are you hearing? We do know that sperm count, and people think it's just the food or the chemicals in the in the food supply, and also the agriculture, supply chains. But I think there's something more than that. And I'm curious as to what your thoughts are on all of that. Definitely, there's something that's off balance here. It's
Yes,
definitely
yes,
something is off
absolutely.
balance. And I don't know for you, but a lot of my younger friends, especially, I mean, they're complaining.
Mhm.
Men, a lot of them seem to have, they can't get it up or whatever. There are some issues going on, and
Yeah.
it's affecting young people because when an older person it seems like older people are having more sex and are having more fun than the younger people. It seems like
Yeah,
it. And I'm like, what's going
yeah,
on?
yeah,
So what's
yeah.
going on?
Well, first of all, there is the phthalates when we put plastics in rivers and waters like Lake Apopko in Florida. Those rivers do phthalates are leached, and when phthalates are leached, um, bass that are males end up with no testicles whatsoever. Frogs end up with no testicles. So very clearly there is the leaching of plastics are they simulate androgens, and so that does reduce the sperm count or has an impact on the sperm count. Also, attitude and attitude does. If you're training a male to be more and more feminine, and which is in some ways very important to be part of femininity is being considerate. And so, and then the males are also hearing that if you, in school, in high school, that if you don't get affirmative consent from a woman in 26 states, this is in the legislature is becoming the law. So you're in college, and let's say you're going out with Michael early years, and
Mhm.
he reaches over and takes your hand without asking, and you saying, "Yes, you may take my hand, Michael." If you later, let's say, break up with him, and you feel angry at him, you can use that as a way of saying he violated, he didn't ask for affirmative consent,
Yeah.
and therefore I want to accuse him of sexual harassment. So men are learning on the one hand, if you don't do it exactly right, you can be kicked out of college. On the other hand, they look around and they see the guys that are having the most sexual opportunities with the most women are often guys who are big risk takers and who are risking not asking girls out, and they feel that if they say what affirmative consent tells them to say, which is it okay to take your hand? Is it okay now to kiss you on the cheek? Is it okay now to kiss you on the lips? I've kissed you on the lips. Is it okay to tongue kiss? We stopped tongue kissing. Can I just start tongue kissing again? I mean, the average woman's going to go, man, just give me a break, you wimp. It's sort of like, this is not what is generating female energy for sexuality. And
Yeah.
so it's a dilemma for the women, it's a dilemma for the men. And it's no wonder that, the guy is going to wonder whether he's doing it right. And if he's wondering whether he's doing it right,
Then
it's
it's
not
not
going to
going to
get
do it right.
hard.
Yeah, you're not going to do it right. Exactly. No, this is sad. And then going back to what you were saying, the only guys that seem to, being having activity going are almost like the mean guys. And
Yeah.
then also we're seeing it. I'm seeing online the rise of people like Andrew Tate and people like that. It seems like our boys are just all going for this. I don't know if it's a knee-jerk reaction to everything else that's going on around them,
Mm.
but either way, it can't be right that we are in a society where role models for young boys and young men are people like Andrew Tate. It's
Yes.
just,
Yes.
and I
And
don't know how we get out of this
yeah,
because
well, I think we get out of it. First of all, that's, I can't think of a worse role model. Well, I can think of a worse role model than Andrew Tate, but he's up there in the worst role model
he's in the
category.
top 10. Top
Yes.
10.
And so here's, I think, an example of what's happening. I'm being filmed for this TV thing, and I'm standing in the middle of a creek on a rock, and I'm talking about what boys are going through in school, from what I've been hearing, and then I see a high school boy walk by, and he's curious about the cameras, so there's a little bit of stopping and looking at what's going on, and I say to him, "You look like you're in high school. Is that accurate?" And he says, "Yes." I said, "Well, we're talking about boys in high school. Would you want to come over here and share a little bit about what is going on with you in high school?" And he says, "Yeah, all right. Well," and I said, "And by the way, you and your parents will have 100% permission to say this. None of this will be on air." And so I say that on air, so he's assured of that. So I say, "Tell me what's happening in your high school in terms of what do you hear about boys versus girls?" And he said, "Well, no prompting whatsoever. I hear that boys are the oppressors, that the future is female, that boys throw rocks at them. I hear that it's perfectly fine to talk that way, and even if half in jest. I hear that I'm part of the patriarchy, and that by definition, therefore, I'm an oppressor, and that I oppress women, and that girls and women have been underprivileged for years. And if I ask for anything for myself, I'm just not considering the needs and the resources needed for girls and women. So I say, your energy. I said to him, your energy feels to me like it's heterosexual. Is that correct? And he goes, yeah, yeah. And I go, what type of school do you go to? And he goes, an all boys school. And so it's a private all boys school that is speaking about boys in this way and only this way. So I said, well, do you have a
This is so
girlfriend?
bizarre.
Then I said, you have a girlfriend? And he says, yes. And I said, well, what happens when you share these feelings and thoughts with your girlfriend? Oh, no, I would never share this with my girlfriend. I say,
Wow.
wow, are you serious with her? I mean, is there a
Yeah,
chance,
yeah,
possibility that you could marry her
yeah,
someday?
yeah.
Oh, yeah, yeah, I think so. It's a possibility. And so you're feeling these feelings core to your masculinity,
Yeah.
and you're afraid of sharing them with your girlfriend. And I said, I assume it's afraid. Yes. And he goes, actually, yes. I'm afraid she'll break up with me if she hears me say these things. She's feminist in her orientation, and she'll think that I'm not. And so, and I said, would you get to the place of marrying her without telling her? I'm not sure. I've never thought about that before.
Wow.
And just think of the multiple levels
Phew.
of sadness. And can you imagine, this boy sort of playing some sexual games, interactions where where he's maybe coming on real strong and she's playing resist game and stuff like that. What Esther Perel talks about as being very different between the actual sexuality and the and what's really going on in a relationship in terms of asking for consent. And so all of these things are happening, and we wonder why he's not feeling comfortable being hard.
That's unbelievable. And then in something like that, what are parents to do? Like, if you were to talk to the parents of this young boy, what advice would you give them in terms of how to best support their son to
First,
thrive?
in the Role Mate to Soulmate book, I have a whole chapter on
Yeah.
family dinner nights and how important they are, and how to structure family dinner nights so that everybody has a chance to speak about a different topic each week, and it's facilitated by a different person in the family each week. And so when somebody talks and says what their feelings are, what's going on with them, then their sister and their brother or the parent has to say, what I heard you say is this. And the person who's speaking has a chance to pursue it until he or she feels understood by other members of the family. And so that's part of the family dinner night. Now, as the family dinner night goes on and there's more trust in that, there's more. I encourage the family to be open to talking about controversial topics,
Mm,
and explain particularly that boys in particular love talking about controversial topics. It's exciting, it's on the edge and stuff like that. But it has to be a safe environment to do that. Otherwise, they just keep their mouths shut. And so when that environment is set in a family dinner night structured so they don't become family dinner nightmares, then boys begin to be willing to discuss these things, and the girls begin to be willing to talk about their feelings also. And
mm,
it's safe to say
mm,
both what, if one of them is a feminist, to say what they feel as a feminist, and but also for the brother to be able to safely say what their personal experience of that is.
mm, mm,
And so, and many feminist moms, when they start hearing that their son is terrified about calling Krista because she's too attractive for me, for the first time in their life, they see the fears and insecurities that boys have taking sexual initiatives.
Yeah.
Whereas in the past, what they've only experienced is men who are coming on too strong or plying them with a drink or something
Yeah.
along those lines.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
one of the good things, one of the reasons that many feminist mothers of sons are advocates of the boy crisis book is because that's the first time that they see things from a boy's perspective, and their programming psychologically and biologically is to protect their son,
Mm.
whereas their programming is to be protected by a male. And so they
Mm.
now have the permission to sort of say, wow, I never realized this vulnerability.
Mm. Wow. Well, interesting. And in another ramification of that has to do with the different gender roles and identities. So there's a lot of, obviously talks about gender roles and identities.
Mhm.
What's your take on that, and how do you think it's going to affect, or it is affecting already, or it will in the future, affect men, boys,
Mhm.
like all of this talk around, gender identities, gender roles.
Yes.
How, like, where do you see our future? What do you see happening in the future, um, as things go right now?
I hope that the last third of the Rollmate to Soulmate book is something called From Civil War to Civil Dialogue.
Yeah, so good.
My hope is that in the future, the training that people have to be able to hear their loved ones is able to be modified and extended to people we disagree with politically. So taking some of the things I said before is, let's say you meet somebody that's on the opposite end of the spectrum, of the political spectrum, and they're in the family, and you want to be able to understand them, but every time you get together with them, you're just fighting each other. So the first thing to do is to let them know what you appreciate about them as a human being.
Mm,
The fact that if I were to look at you and we were at different ends of the spectrum, I'd say,
mhm,
I really love the way you listen, and
mhm,
I also love that you have this combination of warmth but also thoughtfulness. And I happen to know you personally, so you're an amazing person in terms of basically having ideas and thoughts, and also at the same time you're probably the most sophisticated and being able to spot when people are doing things that you could be helpful with, and integrating that with your thinking. And so I would first share that appreciation of you on a
mhm,
specific level.
mhm,
Then you're beginning to have the first steps toward feeling that you're not with an enemy.
mhm,
And then second, I'd share with you about the fact that no matter where you stand on the political spectrum, the fact that that we get into disagreements, because you care.
yeah.
And we get into disagreements because you are not apathetic. And a democracy is made up best of people who care and who are not apathetic. And therefore, you're as core to a democracy as I am. Now, let me start with the process of discovering the virtue that may have gone too far, that became a vice. Then we go back to a little bit what I was talking about feminists before, how the virtue was that they really cared about women being empowered, and they
Mm,
really cared about women being able to have opportunities they never had before, whether it was CEO or have children or not have children. And
mhm,
so I asked the person who was listening to listen after they alter their state. So you can't say to maybe a friend or a colleague at work that you love them and have the love guarantee, but have them modify that to what I call the respect guarantee. So if you and I we're not family, and so
mhm,
if I share with you, if I'm able to hear everything you say,
mhm,
you will, even if I disagree with you, you'll feel more respect for me for being able to do that. And because I'm allowing you to share the full spectrum of your feelings in a way that makes sense to you, I'm likely to increase my respect for you as well.
mhm,
And then we're able to sort of deal with each other with a great deal more respect than we otherwise would. And so I
mhm,
would go through that type of set of mindset alteration before I listen to you.
mhm,
Once I listen to your perspective, I'd say to you, um, what I heard you say is this, this, and this.
Mm,
And did I distort anything? And
mm,
when I ask if you've distorted anything, you would tell me what you feel was distorted. And
mm,
I would not argue with you about that. I'd work at it until you
mm,
feel it's 100% not distorted.
mm,
And then I'd ask, did I miss anything? And then I'd go through the same process. And then I'd ask, do you want to add anything new? And the reason I ask that is because once you feel the environment is safe,
yeah,
then you may be willing to add something new, and you may even discover thoughts inside of yourself you didn't
that's
even know you were thinking because it was too dangerous to think them in my in a space that would have just argue with you. And so this is an example of what I have people do, which I call from civil war to civil
civil
dialogue.
dialogue.
And I feel if we can all get each other, we were at a meeting together recently, and I was talking at this meeting about us being the organization we were part of, being leaders in this type of process, even if we have different political views than the
That's
people we differ with.
That's right. That's right. I think that is so critical, and I hope many more take you up on that on, on you guiding us through that process. And I very much look forward to going through that process guided by you with this organization that you were talking about.
Thank you.
Um, Dr. Farrell, this has been amazing, and so I'm wondering if you are able to share any of your upcoming work, with us, or what are your upcoming projects and or books that you're working on, or what are what's coming up?
I've just the Role Mate to Soulmate book is coming out next week, so this is I'm focusing on that right now. But I am under contract with my publisher to update a book that I wrote years ago, 30 years ago, called The Myth of Male Power,
Mm,
and I'll be calling that book The Paradox of Male Power. And I'll be explaining, and because paradox makes a lot more sense to women, because when they hear myth of male power, many times they think, well, wait a minute, men have all this type of power, and indeed they do. I was calling it myth because I felt that that was not the whole picture, but it's a
mm,
lot clearer up front to call it the paradox of male power.
interesting.
And so I have an opening chapter called the Myth of Male Power was written in 1992.
Mm.
And so I have my opening chapter is What's New Since 92. And my wife,
I love
my,
it.
my wife did the opening statement for that. And the answer was everything and nothing.
Nothing. Okay. Well, I think she's very right. Actually, this is
Yes.
that's funny. That's funny. And Dr. Farrell, finally, do you have any parting thoughts or messages for our listeners who are interested in understanding and addressing the issues that you've highlighted in your work?
Yes. For many people, actually attending the Role Mate to Soulmate workshop at Esalen and Big Sur or someplace else is really not viable. But what is viable is getting a hold of the book, which is very inexpensive. And in the book is a QR code that allows you to get the Role Mate to Soulmate online video course at half the price. And the reason that's so important is because going through these exercises just by reading them gets a little bit long and tedious. But seeing me take two couples through these processes and then being able to pause on the computer and be able to do that with your partner and then come back and see what you've
Mm,
done wrong and have me work
mm,
with the other two couples about what the stumbling blocks were, make it a lot more exciting and engageable. And as I mentioned before, um, learning what you learn from the Role Mate to Soulmate book or even from the online video is just about worthless if you don't practice it.
practice it.
Because everything I'm talking about is biologically unnatural. And to do things that are unnatural requires a reprogramming of our neurons to make
Yeah.
it repeat it often enough so it becomes a natural part of you to listen in a way that your partner can feel truly heard, and therefore your love can be
Mm.
very much deepened.
Very true. It has to be a mindful practice. You have to.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
for
absolutely.
sure. I get that. Well, Dr. Farrell, this has been a blessed and really good time. I never tire talking to you, listening to you.
Mm.
You have so much wisdom, and I just wanted to thank you for sharing all of his very valuable insights with us today. Your work has undoubtedly made a very significant impact, continues to make really big impact. And so for that, we're grateful for the opportunity, that we had to discuss these important topics with you today. And to our listeners, I want to thank you for tuning into the Magatte Wade Show. Be sure to subscribe for more enlightening conversations like the one we just had with Dr. Farrell, and join us next time as we continue to challenge narrative and inspire change, hopefully. Thank you.